I'm Professor Celia Kitzinger, and I'm co-director of the Coma and Disorders of Consciousness Research Centre at Cardiff University. I'm talking about the role of family and friends in decisions about clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. There's a common belief that next of kin have special rights in relation to making decisions about someone who lacks the capacity to make decisions for themselves. But in fact, under the law of England and Wales, they can't give consent to or refuse treatment for a patient unless, in the special situation, they've been appointed as a health and welfare attorney and the box has been ticked that says that they have the right to make life and death decisions. Normally, in this sort of situation, it's the treating doctor, often, for example, the GP, who is the decision maker, although they should consult family, friends, colleagues, partners, anyone engaged in caring for the person or interested in his welfare. That goes well beyond simply the next of kin. And what the doctor is doing is consulting those people about what the patient was like, the patient's wishes, the patient's feelings, beliefs, their values, the way they lived their life, the sort of information that can help inform what that patient might decide for themselves if they were able to about clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. When these cases have gone to court, judges have often emphasised the role of family and friends as the people who ultimately know the patient's personality best. As Mr. Justice Hayden said in a case called Miss S, that's not to say that their wishes and views should be determinative, but it is extremely important that they're heard and that their observations are given appropriate weight. It's the role of the treating doctor to start the conversation that will help them to make decisions about clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. This means asking really early on questions about the patient's values, wishes, feelings and beliefs, and trying to determine from friends and family what quality of life means to the patient themselves. You shouldn't be waiting for families to raise the question of clinically assisted nutrition and hydration being withdrawn. Early on, it should be possible to say to families that clinically assisted nutrition and hydration may at some point in the future no longer be in the patient's best interests. You need to make it clear that these decisions are yours, not the decisions of family and friends, and explain the basis on which those decisions are made. That means emphasising that the patient's wishes, which they can report on, are really important. Doctors sometimes say that they only see one member of the family or a few members of the family who regularly visit, but it's important to involve other people who perhaps are not visiting because they have strong views that the patient shouldn't continue to have CANH and don't want to see the patient suffer in that situation. There's a wide range of people who might be appropriate to consult, including those you might not have met. Do ask those who visit who else should be consulted, including people who might not share the views that they themselves hold. Family may have concerns about withdrawing clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. They may also have concerns about it continuing to be provided. So I'll deal with each in turn. Family concerns about not providing or withdrawing clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. One of the concerns that family and friends often express is that by withdrawing clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, you're giving up on the patient. Sometimes they believe that this is because the patient is a less valued member of society, perhaps because they have a learning disability, perhaps because they're very old, or they have pre-existing physical disabilities. They may believe that the clinicians don't understand that the person's life before the brain injury was valued by them, despite those disabilities, and that they're making inappropriate quality of life judgments. So it's really important to hear about the person's life before the brain injury and appreciate that someone with a learning disability, for example, may have had a really good quality of life on their own terms. So it's helpful to avoid making any suggestion that there are financial underpinnings to a decision to withdraw clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. Families also cling on to hope, particularly in the context of uncertainty. Brain injuries, in particular, create a context in which doctors often feel that the prognosis cannot be sure. And in that context, families are likely to say, she's a fighter. You don't know what she's like. She survived the car accident or she survived the original stroke, and it's too soon to let go. In contexts of uncertainty, families are often fighting for further treatments. Families are likely to feel that all medical treatments, including clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, are in the patient's best interests, unless and until the patient has had maximum opportunities at rehabilitation and is receiving excellent care, such that the opportunities for recovery have been optimised. So for some people, withdrawing clinically assisted nutrition and hydration is tantamount to euthanasia. They have fundamental ethical, sometimes religious objections to withdrawal. Where that's the case, it's a good idea to explore it, to discuss the way that the law and medical ethics views it, and also to bring in a mediator. In the end, if there are intractable objections to withdrawing a treatment that the clinical team believe is not in the patient's best interests, then it will have to go to the Court of Protection. For doctors, withdrawing clinically assisted nutrition and hydration is sometimes understood as allowing nature to take its course. That's also true for some families, but for others, that phrase applies more appropriately to, for example, not giving antibiotics when the patient has an infection, which seems like a passive thing, whereas withdrawing a feeding tube feels like actively intervening to cause death. And again, this can cause ethical concerns. Eating and drinking have huge cultural resonance and symbolic value in our culture. The idea of withholding food and water is seen by some people as barbaric or cruel, and the language of starving and dehydrating patients to death is one that families sometimes use. Information about the palliative care provided for these patients is usually helpful here. So I'm now moving on to family concerns about continuing the provision of clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. Many families have told us that clinically assisted nutrition and hydration has simply been provided indefinitely by default by doctors for whom nothing special seems to be happening. There's been no review process, and they feel that as family members they've been put inappropriately in the position of having to raise the issue of whether or not clinically assisted nutrition and hydration is in the patient's best interest. This can cause them to feel enormously guilty and to bear a heavy weight of responsibility for the decision. One woman told us, "I'd feel like a murderer." Sometimes families believe that doctors have simply been frightened to raise treatment withdrawal with them, including one Muslim family who told us, "We were stereotyped." Many families and friends report that when they've tried to raise the question of whether the feeding tube is in the patient's best interests, they've been ignored or actively silenced. One family was told, "That's unethical, we can't talk about that, that's euthanasia," by two consultants. A GP told another family, "Well, it's very difficult because the people in the care home love him so much." When a family does raise these kind of issues, it's really important to take it forward and to create a space for them to discuss their concerns. There is a widespread belief also that some clinicians simply fail to raise the issue of withdrawal or to pick up on family concerns due to their own values and beliefs, and that they're not taking into account the values and beliefs of their patient. Many families come to believe that clinically assisted nutrition and hydration is keeping a person alive with a quality of life that the person themselves would not have valued. This is often expressed as they'd rather be dead. They still often believe, as family members, that withdrawing clinically assisted nutrition and hydration may be barbaric or cruel, or quite often hypocritical by comparison, for example, with a lethal injection, but come to accept it as the least worst option. This is particularly the case when a person appears to be suffering, when what they're witnessing from their loved one on an everyday basis is agitation or groans or apparent pain. Many families have been in the situation where doctors have said that the person may die with an untreated infection, and what they've experienced is the person getting infections repeatedly, not being treated, apparently suffering, but not dying. After many repeated infections, families can come to the view that withdrawing a feeding tube is again a least worst option. In talking to families, we were sometimes given very vivid imagery of clinically assisted nutrition and hydration as force feeding. Some sent us postcards of suffragettes being force-fed in the Cat and Mouse Act, or Guantanamo Bay force feeding. Some described it as torture. It was certainly seen as preventing nature from taking its course. And although many families were fearful in advance of what death from feeding tube withdrawal would be like, most experienced the death, in fact, as peaceful. Family members that we spoke with described how proud they had been that they were able to show love for the patient by honouring their wishes, ensuring that their voice was heard, and protecting them from further unwanted treatment. All the families, though, described the burden of witness that watching their loved one die from withdrawal of treatment entailed. And you can read our article in Palliative Medicine on that. 5 key messages for doctors. First, it's your responsibility to initiate reviews of clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, not to wait for the family to do so. When a review results in a decision to continue clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, you should set a date for when the next review should be held. Second, you'll need to provide support for family and friends in providing information to you under these difficult circumstances. Ask what was important to the person. Ask about their values, their wishes, their beliefs, the way they lived their lives. Ask, what would she say now if she could understand her current situation? Would she want treatment to continue? Ask who else will be able to contribute information to that. And it's really helpful to encourage family members to send you letters or photographs or record their thoughts, not simply to rely on one-off communications. As you gather more information about what was important to the person, their values, wishes, feelings and beliefs, you should be mapping that against the likely level of their recovery. There's always some uncertainty about the level of recovery that a patient might achieve, and also some difficulty in communicating how very disabled a person might be, even with the best level of recovery they might achieve. It's important to provide honest information about the best and also the worst level of recovery a patient might realistically get. In doing this, when talking to families, it really helps to use concrete descriptions that relate to what the person themselves would want to do in order to have quality of life. So if it's important to a patient to be able to do their own personal care, is it realistic that they might be able to recover to do that? If it's important for a patient to be able to communicate, is it possible that they would be able to do that realistically in the future? If family and friends tell you that living independently is crucial to the person's quality of life, you need to address, is that a realistic possibility in the future? 4, it's your responsibility to make the treatment decision. Don't leave families and friends feeling that that's their responsibility or a burden that they need to bear. The question about treatment always needs to be raised as whether clinically assisted nutrition and hydration is still in the patient's best interests, not whether withdrawal is in their best interests, and certainly not whether it's in the patient's best interest to be dead. You will find that sometimes family and friends phrase it that way. That's not the way doctors should be phrasing it. 5, there's information out there that you can refer family and friends to. You don't have to convey all of this information yourself. There's information from the British Medical Association, a leaflet that can be given to families. There's helpful information about palliative care and about other families' experience of a patient's death following clinically assisted nutrition and hydration. And the family should be offered counselling and bereavement support. If you'd like more support in decision-making around clinically assisted nutrition and hydration, the Coma and Disorders of Consciousness Research Centre can help. We're able to offer support both for families and for doctors during the review process. We also offer free e-learning resources and training to a wide range of health professionals and multidisciplinary teams.